In Vietnam, we'd like to challenge the notion that nuclear power is an integral part to the solution to climate change. Nuclear projects are simply economically unviable. In 2016, we canceled 2 nuclear projects due to costs doubling. And with declining costs of solar and wind energy, nuclear energy starts to look less and less economically viable. Now, despite warning against the economic ramifications of nuclear energy, we in Vietnam believe that, that if countries hope to develop their own nuclear energy, it should fall directly under IAEA standards. Countries should be able to license technologies for more powerful nuclear powers to develop their own capabilities without creating a potentially dangerous process.
Thank you, Vietnam. Now we'll have the United Kingdom for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. As a nuclear weapon state and one of the first, or being the first country to have a civil nuclear program, the United Kingdom has seen the effects, both positive and negative, of having nuclear weapons. This is why we have been dedicated to reducing our nuclear footprint and transitioning as we aim to reduce our CO2 emissions, as we all do, due to the Paris Agreement. In that, we encourage all countries to pursue solar power, natural gas, and other modes of nuclear power in order to lead to a more sustainable world. Additionally, we encourage all nuclear weapon states to consider reductions in their current weaponry, similar to how the UK has done over the past 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Now we'll have Niger for the last speech of this moderated caucus for 45 seconds.
The delegate of Niger would like to thank everyone and the delegates that went before her for the discussion of nuclear proliferation and the importance of nuclear energy. When we think about the problem of nuclear weapons, what comes to mind is that mushroom cloud that killed 200,000 people on August 6, 1945. But the deadliest killer of nuclear weapons to this date has not been the bomb itself, but the unsafe management of radioactive material and atmospheric testing. This is why the delegate of Niger, while appreciating what people have talked about so far, would like to steer the conversation to less about nuclear energy and more about how we can get test ban treaties up and going, which to this point, which have been ratified 24 years ago, has still not come into force. 1.5 million people are predicted to die because of the radioactivity produced by atmospheric tests. This needs to take utmost importance before nuclear proliferation. Thank you.
Thank you, delegate of Niger. And my mistake, for our last speaker, we will have Japan for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. Japan, being part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty since 1967, continues that stance that we pursue peaceful nuclear energy as part of the response to climate change. We need more engagement on bringing North Korea into the economic global field. But I'm going to break script for 1 minute and say how proud I am of all of you at CMC MUN. I'm a proud alum and donor. My claim to fame was winning the Diplomacy Award 3 years in a row, and it was one of the best things I ever did at Claremont McKenna. You guys keep rocking the boat. I'm really proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thought that speech was really good. I was like, wow, he sounds like he's done Model UN before. It's so great to have an alum come back, and thank you so much for all of your continued support. Really, really appreciate it. All right, so I think we have time for another moderated caucus. So are there any motions on the floor? Okay, let's see. We'll take 2 motions. So we will start with Norway.
Norway proposes a 10-1 on nuclear disarmament.
Okay, 10-minute moderated caucus, 1 minute speaking time on nuclear disarmament. We'll take one more from Brazil.
10-1 on the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons.
Perfect. 10-1 on Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we will vote on these in the order that they were received, beginning with Norway's motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus, 1 minute speaking time on nuclear disarmament. So all those in favor, please raise your Zoom hand. Okay. That's 7, and all those against? And that's 8. So this motion fails very narrowly. Next, we'll vote on Brazil's motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus, 1-minute speaking time on the non-proliferation treaty. So all those in favor, please raise your hands. That's 11. All those against? And that's just 4, so this motion passes. And Brazil, would you like the first or the last speech?
I will take the first speech, please.
Fantastic. So we will have 10 total speakers. So I will take the next 4 speakers now. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. We'll take Israel. We will take India, Norway, and Estonia. Okay. And we'll call on the rest after those people have spoken. So Brazil, you have the floor for 1 minute.
9 countries have nuclear weapons, and 8 of them are here today. 5 of those 8 have ratified or acceded to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT. Yet these 5 countries are not holding up their side of the bargain. Article 6 of the NPT obligates nuclear weapon states to diminish their nuclear stockpiles in pursuit of full nuclear disarmament. Why then are there over 13,000 nuclear warheads still in existence today? The Federative Republic of Brazil possesses much of the technology required to produce nuclear weapons. Yet since the 1990s, Brazil and many of its neighbors in the global south have forsworn nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, our northern and more developed counterparts have simply paid lip service to the international community through hollow treaties and agreements. If we wish our children to live without fear of nuclear war, it is time that this committee hold nuclear armed states accountable to their word. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And now we'll have Israel for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. As the delegate of Brazil said, the secure world requires an effort from every nation. That includes everyone here. Israel, as many of you know, has not signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That is because of the hypocrisy we see within this own body. We see nations that have nuclear weapons, that continue to develop nuclear weapons, advocating for nuclear non-proliferation. Yet when we look around, the hesitancy to condemn nations that are blatantly developing nuclear weapons remains unsaid. And that, to us, is a massive issue, and an issue this committee has yet to take. If we want to have a comprehensive debate on nuclear weapons, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, we must discuss states that are developing nuclear weapons without any inspection from the IAEA. In fact, Israel said in 2015 IAEA General Conference that if we want to have a WMD-free in the Middle East, we must have a realistic evaluation of the region. And that starts with countries that are developing nuclear weapons without global oversight. It is absolutely vital if we want to secure the world that we need to stop countries that are developing nuclear weapons without any oversight, and that starts today. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Now we'll have India for 1 minute.
13,410. Delegates, there are an estimated 13,410 nuclear warheads currently within global stockpiles today, and yet it only takes one to potentially create massive amounts of disaster. So why has India not signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? The reasoning for this is simple. Other nations, such as the US and Russia, possess 12,170 of these nuclear warheads. Smaller nations who are not under this treaty are not the current issue at hand. While we would love to live in a world that is nuclear free, we recognize that nations have been hoarding these weapons and have been non-comprehensive in their efforts to tackle this issue. Therefore, before India could even consider signing on to this treaty and therefore working towards a more nuclear free future, we believe that we must see substantial effort from the US and Russia if we're moving forward. We currently have a policy of no first use, as well as credible minimum deterrence that protects us within the international community. And we would like to maintain this protection until it is safe to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Now we'll have Norway for 1 minute.
Honorable Chair and fellow delegates, in Norway, we've been saying Norway to nuclear proliferation for decades. In fact, Norway leads the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification, which is intended to identify critical gaps and technical challenges associated with monitoring and verifying this nuclear disarmament. This verification regime is trusted by nuclear and non-nuclear weapons states, which is a crucial step for building confidence and achieving future reductions in nuclear arsenal. If it's not crazy to say that we're all here to create a safer world, it's not crazy to join an initiative that looks to monitor and verify nuclear disarmament. Norway looks forward to collaborating with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Now we'll have Estonia for 1 minute.
As a country that was literally in the middle of the power struggles in the Cold War, I know intimately well the power nuclear weapons have and the fear that they can inspire. Nuclear weapons are a reality in this world today. They are here to stay, and to deny them would be cowardly. That is why it is imperative that we sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for people who are caught in between the power struggles of these powerful countries. I beg of you all, forget your petty political grievances today. There are many powerful countries represented here today. Many of you have catalyzed and perpetuated these struggles with nuclear weapons. I, the delegation of Estonia today, are here to represent those countries who have been caught in the middle of these power struggles, who have had their families and their livelihoods jeopardized by the potential that these weapons have to devastate the entire world today. I beg of you, think of those people. Forget your politics, forget your power struggles. Think of the lives of everyday people today.
Thank you, Estonia. So we will have 5 more speakers in this moderated caucus. At first, I'd love to just have people raise their hands who have not spoken yet, just so we can double check everyone is going to get a chance to speak. So only keep your hand raised if you haven't spoken. Okay, so it looks like that's no one. So go ahead and raise your hands as normal. Okay, fantastic. So we will have Mexico, Japan, Vietnam, Tunisia, and the USA. So we'll begin with Mexico for 1 minute. Mexico, you have the floor.
The only reason Norway says Norway to nuclear weapons is because they can't afford them. The problem here is that small nations aren't supposed to have these nuclear weapons precisely because their spending isn't large enough to maintain the kinds of stockpile of safety that's actually necessary in any developed country. The problems of theft, of possible active use in warfare are just too great to allow countries with limited resources to tackle nuclear weaponry, tackle their own population first, dealing with issues like poverty and healthcare and global warming. But having them have nuclear weapons is just a blatantly irresponsible suggestion. All of this being said, the existence of nuclear weapons, despite their diminishment, is important for the deterrent effect of mutually assured destruction. If we don't have the deterrence of nuclear weapons, we'll go from having proxy wars, as we often currently do, back to the full-scale wars on the scale of the Crimean War, or World War I, or World War II, those massive global wars we had before nuclear weapons were invented. I don't want to live in that world, and I don't think you do either.
Thank you, Mexico. Now we'll have Japan for 1 minute.
I would like to just remind everybody that Japan is the only nation here that has had nuclear bombs thrown on our shores and on our land and killed our people. So I yield the rest of my time to a moment of silence for all the people who died from nuclear weapons. Thank you, Ambassador Ferranda, for reminding me to say that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was actually really close to the full minute and a very good reminder for all of us how real these topics are, even in the simulation. So thank you for that. So now we'll move on to Vietnam, and you will have the floor for 1 minute.
In Vietnam, as a smaller power with no nuclear ambitions, we understand the pressing importance of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We believe that as a small country that is caught between the power struggles of these larger nations, the sheer existence of nuclear weapons ensures that more countries will try to build them for themselves. Without nuclear weapons, countries have no way to compete militarily on an international scale, and this simple power imbalance drives forward the development of future proliferation. We believe that countries that have signed the NPT need to follow it to the letter of their word. They need to commit to reducing their stockpiles immediately, more so than they ever have before. a world with nuclear weapons is an unsafe world. And if nuclear powers agree with each other to remove these weapons from the sphere of influence, it is imperative that we can create a more peaceful world.
Thank you, Vietnam. We'll have Tunisia for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Tunisia would like to call attention to the dais and to the rest of the room the ludicrousy of an argument that was recently heard, given by the delegation of Mexico. The idea that the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, indeed the cessation of their use, is actually potentially a bad thing, that we should prefer proxy wars, and that we should prefer this era of peace that's been brought about by nuclear weapons. Let us ignore the fact that there have been half a dozen near misses that could have brought about the extinction of the human race. Let us ignore the fact that upon a country using nuclear weapons, there's a very high likelihood that there will no longer be any countries at the end of that war. The NPT is not enough. The nation of Tunisia would like to call on the rest of those gathered here today to not only sign on to the NPT, but to sign on to the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, to work towards a world where there is no longer the fear of human extinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunisia. Now we'll have the United States for 1 minute.
While the delegate from Tunisia applauds the 2017 prohibition on nuclear weapons, he fails to recognize that 0 nuclear states have signed onto this treaty for a reason. This is a perfect example of what happens when non-nuclear actors attempt to impose their own agenda onto nuclear actors. Those countries that contain nuclear weapons understand that disarmament is a complicated process. Rapid disarmament is not safe and can place nuclear technology in the hands of those who should not have it. The United States has reduced its nuclear arsenal since the Cold War by 90% through bilateral agreements, not through the whims of random treaties passed by the United Nations. It is essential that those who hold nuclear weapons reduce their arsenals, but at a marginal speed to ensure the safety of the international community and the safety of where these nuclear technologies go. Although I completely understand that there is a frustration with the slow process of nuclear disarmament, but it is for a reason, and it's for the safety of the international community.
Thank you, United States. So we have time for one very short moderated caucus to the tune of 3 or 4 minutes. So I'll entertain 2 motions for moderated caucuses of 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, so we will take the United Kingdom's motion first.
Yeah, motion for a 345 on non-state actors.
Fantastic. So that's a 345 on non-state actors. We'll also take Pakistan's motion.
Motion for a 430 on regional-based agreements.
Fantastic. So 430 on regional-based agreements. We will vote on these from order of most to least disruptive, beginning with Pakistan's motion for a 4-minute moderated caucus, 30-second speaking time on regional agreements. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That's 9. All those against? That's 7. This motion just barely passes. So Pakistan, would you like the first or the last speech?
I'll take the last speech, please.
Fantastic. So we will have 8 total speakers, and I will actually call on all of them right now for the sake of time. All 7 remaining speakers. So if you would like to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your hand.
Point of inquiry. Or clarification, the topic is the role of non-state actors, correct?
This is regional agreements.
Regional agreements, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we will have Russia, Israel, China, and we will have Estonia, India, Mexico, and the USA. Fantastic. So speaking time is 30 seconds. So Russia, you will have the floor for 30 seconds.
the delegation of the Russian Federation affirms its position as one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and further emphasizes the need for robust international security and protection. In fact, the Russian Federation has implemented arms control agreements and participated in threat reduction programs that have dismantled the USSR's previous nuclear arsenal. We can no longer rely on these antiquated notions of soft power, and instead we turn to our basic principles of state policy of the Russian Federation on nuclear deterrence, in which nuclear weapons must serve as a deterrent against existential threats and non-state actors. While we're no longer in the Cold War, when things heat up, who are you going to call? It's the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Russia. We'll have Israel for 30 seconds.
Let's stop the Ghostbusters references and talk about a real agreement that in theory should have been regional, but absolutely wasn't. And I'm talking about the sham of an agreement called JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This deal, let me read you the signatories. China, France, Germany, Iran, Russia, UK, US, which was later withdrawn, which we applaud, and the European Union. No regional actors. This is a disgrace. There is no way around it. Why are other countries intervening in a region's affairs in a way that does not benefit the region itself? Trying to encourage Iran to develop nuclear weapons is an absolute travesty and must be stopped by this body immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Now we'll have China for 30 seconds.
While the delegation of China commends people who are here to talk about regional agreements, we must understand that any regional agreement cannot follow deterrence theory. Time and time again, deterrence theory has been proven wrong. By accumulating nuclear weapons, that is not going to deter people from using them. Any regional agreement needs to have the no first use pledge at the head of their manifesto. Secondly, we encourage non-nuclear states to trust the regional bodies that do have nuclear weapons in order to create a nuclear umbrella safety net. That is the only way that we will pursue a path of disarmament and ensure that the future of this world is protected. Thank you.
Thank you, China. Estonia, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
The world has arrived at a dangerous place where nuclear weapons are being used as a bartering tool to further the hegemonic perception of countries. I agree with the Chinese delegation. Deterrence is a foolish idea. Mexico's commentary on the relative lack of destruction of proxy wars is absurd. I'm sure the Middle East and the existence of North and South Korea would completely disagree on their harmlessness. If we want to have an effective regional agreement, we must make sure that there is a no first use policy implemented in order to further preserve the protection of the people in all of these vulnerable regions.
Thank you, Estonia. Now we'll have India for 30 seconds.
Within the nation of India, we have adopted a no first use policy. And although there has been a void of regional agreements within our area that have been able to be successful, we recognize that as a sovereign nation, we have been able to navigate this successfully by being responsible in our usage. Thus, we would like to point to the fact that we must focus on eliminating nuclear stockpiles in order to reduce the risk of these from happening. And therefore, we must focus on nations such as US and Russia, which could set the charge for nations furthermore. Therefore, we must not focus on bullying regional bodies, but rather allowing us to navigate successfully while also ensuring eventual elimination. Thank you.
Thank you, India. We'll have Mexico for 30 seconds.
We must at the very least have a regional agreement with regard to North America. Too often, Mexico has been the victim of both unscrupulous testing and the dumping of nuclear waste. And unfortunately, both the US and Canada are guilty of doing so within our sovereignty. The testing at Los Alamos in the United States in particular caused irreversible damage to the Chihuahuan and Sonoran ecosystems in northern Mexico. We would request both that we have some form of reparation for the damage and that a future regional agreement be entered into to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again.
Thank you, Mexico. USA, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
The United Nations was built on the promise of eventual nuclear disarmament. We have to remember that one of the first pieces of legislation passed by this body was creating the nuclear investigatory bodies that were supposed to eventually eliminate nuclear arsenals across the world. But we also have to remember that the United Nations is about a balance between sovereignty and security. We absolutely cannot violate the sovereignty of individual actors and must rely on bilateral agreements, which is the most effective way to reduce nuclear arsenals.
Thank you, USA. And our last speaker in the simulation will be Pakistan. You have the floor for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Delegates, in the last moderated caucus, we heard a brilliant argument from the delegate of the US. He's exactly right. Nuclear powers know best how to manage their nuclear resources. And similarly, nations within South Asia know best how to manage the nuclear resources in the region. And this respect, which is crucial towards regional circumstances, is embedded in the NPT itself. We have to look to Article 7 for its respect towards nuclear responsibility lying within the regions themselves and understanding their specific circumstances.
Thank you, Pakistan, and thank you so much, everyone, for participating, for watching. I hope that was engaging, and I hope it gave you guys a little bit of an idea of what MUN is really all about.